Hey there. Before we jump into these spine-tingling tales, I've got a little challenge for you. Why not join the Nightmare Cradle family? Just tap that subscribe button and see what kind of chills await you. I promise, it's nothing too scary. Unless you're afraid of a good thrill. Come on, join the club. We're all here to keep the shivers going, and who knows, you might just find your next favorite nightmare. Have you ever felt it? That icy, invisible grip tightening around you, just when you think you're alone. Perhaps it's that faint rustle you hear when everything else is still, or the chill that hovers in the air, pressing against your skin. Sometimes, it feels as if there's something right there, just beyond the shadows watching, waiting. Tonight, we're stepping into stories that pull back the veil on the ordinary, revealing an unsettling world just beneath it. These tales, well, they aren't just stories. They're true accounts from people like you and me. They're from those who've stumbled upon the unexplainable encounters that defy reason, leaving those involved shaken, questioning what they thought they knew. Each story stranger than the last, each event more disturbing than the one before. And yet, they happened. In homes, on quiet streets, down familiar hallways. Places that feel safe until they don't. And as you listen, you might start wondering if these things are closer than they seem. Close enough to feel, close enough to hear. Now, imagine yourself in one of these stories, where every sound, every shadow, might not be what it seems. What would you do if you found yourself facing something unexplainable? How would you react when there's nowhere else to turn? Take a moment, think about it. And as we step into these experiences, remember, this could happen to anyone. Even you. It all began so quietly that I almost convinced myself it was nothing. A sound, faint and distant, coming from the attic in the dead of night. It was subtle at first, like a single, soft tap, barely audible over the usual silence of the house. But then it returned. Night after night, I'd hear it always around the same time, steady and rhythmic, like some strange, hollow pulse drifting down from above. I would lie in bed, listening, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, trying to brush it off as the house settling or maybe some stray draft I hadn't noticed before, but after a few nights, I began to notice other things. It was the little details that got to me, the kind you can't just ignore. Things started shifting. A glass on the counter would be moved slightly to the side. A book I'd left on the table would be nudged out of place, open to a page I hadn't left it on. I would find doors creaking open just an inch or two, despite always closing them before going to bed. And that chill. Every time I passed by the attic door, I could feel a coldness that seemed to press close, the kind of chill that clings to your skin. No windows open, no logical explanation, just a cold that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Finally, curiosity and frustration got the better of me. One evening, just after sunset, I grabbed a flashlight and made my way up the stairs to the attic. Each step creaked under my weight, echoing through the empty house as if mocking me. I paused at the top, taking a deep breath before opening the attic door. The flashlight cast a narrow beam that sliced through the darkness, illuminating bits and pieces of old, forgotten things, dust-covered boxes, furniture draped in sheets, a few stray cobwebs glistening in the light. For a moment, it all seemed normal, like I had imagined the whole thing, but then, as I turned to leave, something caught my eye, a shadow, quick and fleeting, just at the edge of the light. I whipped the flashlight around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just empty space. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. Maybe I was just tired, maybe the darkness was playing tricks on me. I forced myself to breathe, to calm down, and then hurried back down the stairs, locking the attic door behind me. But that shadow, it stayed in my thoughts long after I'd returned to the comfort of my room. The nights that followed grew more unsettling. The tapping grew louder, as if whatever was up there wanted to make its presence known. It was no longer faint, it was a steady, insistent beat, echoing through the ceiling. I could feel it reverberating in my bones, a sound that wouldn't let me sleep. And the cold seemed to spread, filling the hallways, creeping under doors, pressing against me wherever I went. One night, I had enough. I decided to confront whatever was in that attic, to put an end to the torment once and for all. Flashlight in hand, I climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. I reached the top, my hand shaking as I gripped the doorknob, and opened the door slowly. I took a step inside, letting the flashlight sweep across the room, illuminating every corner, every shadow. And then I saw it, at the far end of the attic, standing perfectly still, was a figure. It was dark, featureless, and tall, so tall it nearly touched the ceiling. I could feel its eyes on me, though I couldn't see them. It was as if it was staring straight through me, studying me, waiting. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I wanted to scream, to turn and run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was trapped in its gaze, frozen by a fear unlike anything I had ever felt. Then, in an instant, the figure was gone. Just like that, it vanished, leaving me standing there in the silence and darkness. I stumbled down the stairs, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the flashlight. I could barely breathe, the terror still gripping me, refusing to let go. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, every little sound making me jump, every shadow filling me with dread. The days that followed were a blur. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head. That maybe the darkness and my own imagination had gotten the best of me. But the shadow was relentless. I would catch glimpses of it at odd moments standing in the doorway of a room, lurking just at the edge of my vision, watching. Always watching. Each time, it was closer, and each time, the feeling of being watched grew more intense, more suffocating. I began to feel its presence even when I couldn't see it. I would walk down the hall, and it was there, following me, a constant weight pressing against my back. I could feel its cold breath on my neck, hear the faint rustling of something shifting in the shadows. It was inescapable, an invisible force that haunted every moment, filling the house with an unshakable sense of dread. One morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my things, barely able to think, my hands shaking as I threw clothes into a bag. I left the house without looking back, heart racing, a sense of relief mingling with the fear that it might somehow follow me. But even now, long after I've left, there are nights when I still feel it. That cold, unrelenting presence, watching me from some distant place, waiting as if it's only a matter of time before it finds me again. I was driving home late one night, traveling down a long, empty stretch of road. There were no streetlights, no signs of life, just the dense darkness pressing in from both sides, broken only by the narrow beam of my headlights. It was one of those roads that makes you feel completely isolated, as if you're the only person left in the world. As I rounded a curve, something caught my eye, a figure on the side of the road, standing alone. It looked like a woman. She was just standing there, her head tilted slightly, staring out into the darkness. My first instinct was to drive on, but something about her made me hesitate. She looked lost, out of place. So, despite the growing unease creeping up my spine, I slowed down and rolled down the window, asking if she needed a ride. She didn't say much, just nodded and climbed into the passenger seat. The air around her felt strangely cold, but I brushed it off as the night air seeping in. She sat there quietly, her hands clasped in her lap, and her long, dark hair falling over her shoulders. There was something unsettling about her gaze, though. She seemed to be staring straight ahead, her expression blank, her eyes distant, as if she wasn't entirely there. Trying to ease the tension, I asked her where she was headed. She mumbled something I couldn't quite make out, something about a town up the road. Her voice was soft, almost like it was coming from far away. And it had this strange echo to it. I tried to dismiss it, thinking maybe she was just exhausted or distracted, but there was something about the way she spoke that set me on edge. The silence between us grew heavier, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I glanced over at her hands. They were clasped so tightly that her knuckles were almost white, and her skin looked unnaturally pale, as if she'd been out in the cold for far too long. But the strangest part was her stillness. She didn't shift, didn't blink, just kept staring straight ahead, her expression frozen in that blank, unblinking gaze. As we drove on, the discomfort grew. I tried to ask her another question. Something to break the silence, but she didn't respond. Her face remained expressionless, her gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond the road. I could feel my pulse quickening, a deep unease settling in my chest. Something wasn't right, and I could sense it with every fiber of my being. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I glanced over, intending to speak to her, but she was gone. The seat beside me was empty, as if she'd never been there at all. I slammed on the brakes, pulling over to the side of the road, my hands gripping the wheel as I struggled to steady my breathing. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I knew she had been there. I had seen her. Spoken to her. But now, there was nothing, just the empty road stretching into the night. After a few moments, I turned the car around, deciding to go back to the spot where I'd picked her up, hoping to find some trace of her, some explanation. But when I got there, the road was deserted. There was no sign of her, no footprints, nothing. Just silence and darkness, as if the whole encounter had been nothing more than a strange dream. It wasn't until later that I heard the stories. They say that, on certain nights, a woman appears on that very stretch of road, looking for a ride. Some claim she's searching for something she lost, others say she's trying to make her way home. But everyone agrees on one thing: she never reaches her destination. She vanishes without a trace, leaving the driver alone, with nothing but the memory of her cold, haunting presence. Since that night, I've avoided that road. But every now and then, when I think back to that encounter, I wonder, was she real? Or was it something beyond my understanding? And I ask myself, if you were driving down that lonely road and saw someone waiting there, would you stop? I moved into an old apartment building, thinking I'd found a good deal, a quiet place, affordable rent, close enough to everything I needed. At first, it felt like any other old building, creaky floors and faint smells of paint and dust. But after a few days, I started to notice something strange. It was subtle at first, like a faint scratching noise, almost as if it was coming from within the walls. At night, when everything was silent, I'd hear it. A soft, repetitive scratching, slow and deliberate, just behind my bedroom wall. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was mice, or the pipes settling. But the sound was so constant, so close, that it made it hard to sleep. I'd lie there in bed, listening to it, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, trying to ignore it. But the longer I lay there, the louder it seemed to get, and then, one night, I heard something else. Faint whispers, mixed in with the scratching. At first, I couldn't make out the words, but they sounded so close, like someone speaking from just inches away, their voice muffled by the wall. I sat up, straining to listen, my heart pounding. The whispers were soft, almost like a breath, and then I heard my name. Clear as day, a voice whispering my name, dragging out each syllable, as if savoring it. It sent a chill down my spine. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that maybe I was just tired. But the next night, it happened again. The same scratching, the same whispering, that voice calling my name. Every night, it grew louder, more insistent, as if whoever, or whatever, it was, wanted me to hear. I felt like I was losing my mind. I'd sit up in bed, staring at the walls, trying to find some logical explanation. But nothing made sense. The walls were solid, unbroken, with no gaps or cracks. Yet, somehow, the sounds continued, echoing through the silence. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers became part of my routine, an unwelcome presence in my life. I tried everything to block it out, earplugs, music, leaving the lights on. But nothing worked. I could still hear it, that scratching and whispering. Always so close. I stopped sleeping. My days blurred into nights, and I found myself jumping at every little sound, afraid that the whispers would follow me, that I'd hear my name called out in the middle of the day. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. One night, after another hour of lying there, listening to the whispers calling my name, I grabbed a flashlight and a drill. I stood there, staring at the wall, the one where the sound seemed to come from. I took a deep breath and started drilling, desperate to find some explanation, something tangible that would make sense of it all. As I drilled, the scratching stopped, the whispers fell silent. It was as if the wall itself was holding its breath. Waiting. My hands were shaking as I pulled away a section of drywall, shining the flashlight into the dark space behind it. And there, scratched into the wood, was a message, barely visible in the dim light. It read, "You're not the first." The words were carved deep, each letter jagged and uneven, as if someone had scratched them out in a hurry, with desperation. A chill ran through me as I read those words over and over, my mind racing. I wasn't the first. Someone else had lived here, heard the same whispers, the same scratching. Someone else had been driven to this point, just like me. I staggered back, the flashlight slipping from my hands, the reality of it crashing down on me. I wasn't alone. Whatever haunted this place had been here long before me. And it would be here long after I left. I moved out the very next day, unable to stay another night in that place. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is silent, I still hear it. A faint scratching, a soft whisper, calling my name. And I wonder if, somewhere, it's still waiting, watching from within the walls, waiting for its next resident to listen. I had just moved into the dorms, excited to start my first year of college. It was an older building, a bit run down, but nothing that really bothered me. At least, not at first. My room had its quirks, creaky floors, dim lighting, and a bathroom that always seemed just a little too cold. But what caught my attention most was the mirror above the sink. It was old, with faint scratches across the glass, and whenever I looked at it, my reflection seemed different. It was subtle, almost like something was off, but I could never quite put my finger on it. The first time it happened, I was brushing my teeth late at night. Everyone else on my floor was asleep, and the only sounds were the faint hum of the fluorescent light and the water running from the tap. I glanced up, and for a moment, I thought I saw something, a shape standing just behind me, silent and still. I blinked, looked again, and it was gone. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. After all, I was tired, adjusting to a new place. But the feeling stayed with me, a quiet unease that I couldn't shake. Over the next few nights, it happened again. Each time I looked into the mirror, I felt as though I wasn't alone. I'd catch glimpses of movement, shadows just beyond my reflection. And then, one night, I saw it. A face, faint and distorted, staring back at me from behind my shoulder. Its features were blurred, almost stretched, as if the mirror couldn't fully capture it. I froze, my heart pounding, unable to look away. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just stared, its gaze fixed on me through the glass. After that, I started avoiding mirrors. I'd brush my teeth quickly, looking down, refusing to glance up, afraid of what I might see. But the feeling followed me. Even outside the bathroom, I could feel it, the sense of being watched, of eyes on me, cold and unblinking. I'd find myself looking over my shoulder, checking my reflection in windows, catching glimpses of that same distorted face. It was always there, lurking just at the edge of my vision. Each night, the presence felt closer, more intense, like it was closing in. I stopped sleeping. Too afraid of what I might see if I looked into the mirror. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I couldn't escape. The fear was all-consuming, filling every corner of my mind. Then, one night, I made the mistake of looking again. I told myself it was just paranoia, that I'd imagined the whole thing. But as soon as I glanced up, I saw it, the figure, closer than ever, its face twisted, mouth open, eyes hollow and dark. And then, slowly, it reached out, its hand moving toward me from within the glass. I stumbled back, heart racing, my skin prickling with terror. The figure faded, but the memory of that moment, of that outstretched hand, stayed with me. The next day, I packed up and left campus. I couldn't stay there, not after what I'd seen. But later, I heard rumors. Others had seen it too, glimpsed that same figure in the mirrors, felt the same cold presence watching them. And sometimes, when I pass by a mirror, I catch myself glancing, half expecting to see that face staring back at me. Next time you look in a mirror, remember. You're not always alone. Think back to each story you've heard tonight. Picture yourself lying in bed, listening to the faint tapping from the attic, trying to convince yourself it's nothing. Until you feel that presence waiting just above you. Imagine the dark road stretching out before you, empty and silent, and then glancing to find your passenger gone without a trace. Remember that apartment with the whispers coming from deep within the walls, calling your name night after night, growing louder, closer. Or that face in the mirror, twisted, staring back from just over your shoulder. These stories aren't far-off myths or old tales. They happened in homes, on quiet roads, and in places we pass by every day. Places that feel safe. Until they don't. It's a reminder that the unexplained might be closer than we think, waiting in the ordinary, hiding in plain sight. So tonight, as you turn off the lights, keep your senses open. Listen closely to the small sounds, the subtle shifts in the dark. Because the things we've shared here aren't just stories. They're encounters, from people who thought they were alone. Until they realized something was there. If you have your own story to share, one you can't quite explain, leave it in the comments. And if you're up for more tales that make the darkness feel a little closer, don't forget to subscribe. Let us know if there's a theme or story you want to hear next time. There's always another tale waiting, closer than you might think.